Welcome back to another edition of Fire here on NNPA and Black Press USA. I'm your host, Taylor Thomas. Sorry about the delay. We went through a computer, two cell phones, and we're doing this on my tablet. The show must go on. It's a really important topic. We have a great and very special guest coming in and talking to us tonight. So if you have friends, family, or you even have dealt with stress and anxiety in 2020 and of course 2021, this program is really for you to get the information to start looking into how you can get help, identify the signs, and see where the resources are. My special guest tonight is Dr. Jessica Smedley. She is a licensed clinical psychologist, and we are so happy to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Pleasure to be here.
Now, I know that you work with students, but you also work with adults. Before we kind of get into that, because there's so many questions, we literally could take 2 hours talking to you. Let's learn a little bit about you professionally, and then let's get into the aspects of what you do with children and what you do with adults.
Sure. So my educational background, I have a graduate degree in counseling psychology where I focused on marriage and family therapy. And then I went on to get my doctorate in clinical psychology. And so I consider myself a generalist, but I enjoy working with the adult population, specifically focusing with relationship issues, trauma, anxiety, depression. And then, as you said, I do some work with students as well at the school age. And so psychological evaluations that focus on learning disabilities, emotional, behavioral challenges. So that's sort of how I split my time professionally.
So, Dr. Smedley, in my social media posts, I mentioned about stress and depression and anxiety for 2020. Most of it connected to COVID in some shape, fashion, or form. And they were in 2021. We're still dealing with it. There's expected to be an additional 85,000 people predicted could die this month alone by the end of the month. I'm sure is putting your educational and professional training to the test.
That is certainly one way to put it. Just before the show, I was mentioning how our caseloads have really just grown in the past several months because of people interested in caring for themselves because of the level of stress and anxiety and grief that we're all sort of collectively experiencing, especially for people of color. And so historically, there's been a lot of stigma around mental health in the Black community. And so to see those numbers increase in a positive, proactive, preventative space has been encouraging.
So, Dr. Smedley, even before the COVID virus hit our country the way it has, there was a shocking spike in young African American kids committing suicide. And before that report came out, which people have been talking about it the last year or so, it was really pretty much thought that white kids held it. I mean, the older kids do, but to see fit, they were saying there was 15 and 16-year-old African American kids choosing to take their lives. That has got to be traumatic. Is that something that you have had to deal with, in 2020, 2021?
I can't say that has directly come across my virtual office space per se, but definitely hearing about it from other colleagues or members of the community, just because of the increased stress that we're seeing. And we also know that historically, as Black people, we have a disparity in the access of resources that we, have within our reach for various systemic and institutional reasons. But it's absolutely a tragedy and a public health crisis that is certainly worthy of attention.
So, amongst professionals like yourself, knowing that we may go until the end of the year before we can take off the mask and fully return to restaurants and places that we never thought that we would not be able to go, or if we go, you have to cover up, and now they're asking us to cover up to double a mask. How do you go about a person who didn't have mental health now looking at, this is wearing on me? Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think there's several different faces here. We have people who had mental health issues before.
Sure.
We have people who were stressed before, and this is a whole nother level of stress. We're
Hmm.
all dealing with the same thing, but dealing with it differently. How
Right.
do you help people when they come into your doors with questions about what's going on with me mentally? Why am
Hmm.
I feeling this way?
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's a great way to frame it. It's literally just finding a starting place and saying, what got you here? Let's just practice identifying emotions. Let's get used to using emotional language. I think that a lot of times we focus on a behavior or a mood or a colloquialism that we might attribute to how we're doing, but it can be helpful to teach people to identify when they're angry and what that looks like, when they're depressed and what that looks like, and to normalize it based on the events that are happening. Our emotions are very important guides that we need to help us navigate the world and our experiences. And so we have to be in tune with them so that we know what we need at any given time, how to take care of ourselves, and how to communicate our needs to other people. That's really important as well.
So, Dr. Smedley, I remember maybe 6 or 8 months into this, my mother, who's always like, "Are you okay? Are you doing?" Checking on me,
Hmm.
and that's the first time I really thought of, like, I mean, she's like, "Are you depressed?" I'm like, "Are you stressed?" And I said, "I don't feel stressed." Is that something what a person who is stressed or depressed will say? I don't feel depressed. I don't feel stressed. And then maybe we can talk about some of the signs that may make a person say, you know what, maybe I do need to speak to someone. Maybe my way of expressing stress or showing it is not maybe my hair coming out. Maybe it's I'm eating more. But can we talk about
Sure.
that?
Absolutely. I think part of it is cultural. I think that a lot of times we're used to just going
Yeah,
without taking time to stop and check in with ourselves.
right.
We are historically a people who have uh, been extremely beautifully resilient, but also at the cost of not just slowing down and taking time to learn that the importance of self care. And so, as you said, sometimes symptoms may not look like how we see on the movies, where people are in bed all day or
Right.
might be suicidal or, some of these more extreme stereotypical symptoms. But it might be that we are, like you said, eating more. I think alcohol sales went up by 20,
Yes.
30% early in the
Yes.
pandemic. So there's
Yes.
substance abuse. I think relational stressors happen. So people start having communication breakdowns and just all sorts of various physical symptoms as well. So, especially in kids, kids are known to express more somatic symptoms than they are being able to say, I'm sad or unhappy. Their stomachs might hurt, their headaches might be increasing, or various physiological pains and discomforts. So, there are all sorts of signs to look for when we're thinking about how stress impacts our bodies.
So let's start with the kids. As a parent, and this is again, there's so many multi prongs. I mean, you just named so many different things. There's so many multi prongs to this. If I'm a parent or a guardian of a child and I'm stressed or depressed, I may not even see the signs that you're talking to me about now. But
Hmm.
let's just say the person that is watching over a child, a
Hmm.
teacher, administrator, a family relative, a neighbor, what are some things that we should look for? Or what are some things we should ask to get the information we need?
Sure. So, the biggest thing about kids is to note behavior changes.
Okay.
So pay attention to sleep patterns, pay attention to diet patterns, pay attention to if they're acting out more or less, if they're engaging with people, siblings, or friends more or less. I know social connectivity can be hard because of the pandemic, but
Mhm.
there's still a certain baseline that we expect of kids and their functioning. Is their mood changing? Are they less playful? Are they overly playful? Are they, not engaging in the same sort of humor that sometimes that they do. So I think that there are lots of behaviors to look at when it comes to children.
So let me ask you this as well. So, how dangerous or helpful is it for children to be connected to social media – during this time where we're shut in, everything is virtual?
My answer is always it's age dependent
Okay.
and with supervision.
Okay.
I think it's important for parents to always have an idea of what their kids are looking at. I think kids are extremely intelligent and know how to get around blocks and privacy passwords and all sorts of things. And so it's important to have an open line of communication. And so you want your child to feel like they are safe enough to explore the world in a way that is independent for them, but also safe so that they know what is appropriate and what is not appropriate to look at on social media. And so I think that communication and using the relationship is such a huge factor as it relates to social media.
So once we identify or see one or two or three of these symptoms, and maybe you can even tell me, do I look for one or two? Is it just one can make the difference? What do I do from there to get help, to get answers to possible concerns?
Sure. I think it's always good and proactive to start even with just one or two symptoms
Okay.
and to check in. I think that kids, although are younger, they can still tell you a lot about how they're doing. And so ask them how they're doing. Ask them if they want to play. If they don't want to play, why not? If they're not interested in talking to their friends, why is that? Uh, Maybe they can write about it if they're not willing to talk about it, or maybe they can draw a picture of how they're feeling. There are a lot of ways that kids can communicate how they're doing. And if your concerns increase, absolutely call pediatrician. If they are, listening and feeling that it may not be physical, then maybe it is that they can give you a referral to a child psychologist or therapist. So there are lots of resources out there, but sometimes it's knowing where to start, who to ask. And I always think that primary care physicians and pediatricians can be a great start.
So, Dr. Smedley, I have to ask you the $1 million question. For with the fact that we know that millions of Americans are out of work and many of
Mhm.
them are struggling to pay their bills, and which would mean that they had to opt to pay for insurance, that may
Mhm.
be something that's left on the back burner. What
Mhm.
type of help or assistance or guidance is there for families or individuals who do not have insurance, but they need some type of mental help?
Absolutely. So, as we know, that is such a huge barrier and stressor that can exacerbate stressors within the home and community. I always think that starting with church sometimes, if people are connected to a body of faith, that is a great place to start. If it's not, a service that the church can directly provide, just decreasing the level of isolation that you're dealing with the stress can be a buffer. And sometimes there are other local nonprofits that may have very low fee services or reduced fees. And sometimes it's going through, again, not optimal, but going through a hospital or emergency urgent care sort of situation and seeing what referrals are options.
So, what are some things that we can do in lieu of that? I mean, you have people that will see all the signs or one sign and
Mhm.
disregard it. So, what can we do if we just want to get our kids to kind of reset each day and not carry the burden of what's happening in this country and across the
Mhm.
world and perhaps in their home?
Sure.
What do you suggest that we do?
Sure. So one of the first things that I recommend for any stage is routine, and that's from 0 to 90.
Okay.
I think that humans thrive on some certain level of routine and predictability. And so kids especially need structure. They need to be able to have some sort of predictability about what's coming. Kids do well when they know what their expectations are. So it might be starting the day with looking at the schedule. It might be starting the day with playing their favorite song in the morning or engaging in a positive mantra or affirmation, something that's encouraging and uplifting that sets the tone for the day while also spelling out, whether visually, verbally, however it is, which you, how you want to see them thrive. But then also remind them that they are loved and supported and cared for.
Should we be concerned if our children um, they're okay. I'm fine. That seems like, well, can you be fine? Can you just be fine with just, being at home, being in a room or in a room in the house and not necessarily want to go out? Is that like okay?
I think there are certain developmental stages where that is okay. I also think that kids are more resilient than we give them credit for.
Okay.
And so you do see there's a certain type of child who is actually doing okay because they might have some anxiety in school or in public, or they might be at that middle school, high school age where they're going through relationship traumas and, having a hard time navigating those assertiveness skills to navigate the interpersonal skills that requires. And so some kids are kind of comfortable at home and not having to deal with it.
You're tuning in to NNPA and Black Press USA Spire program. We're talking about stress and depression, all related with, and some before COVID hit, but definitely really for the last 10 months, everyone feels like they've been on lockdown, especially with the number of students that are having to take classes and from home. You've got freshmen that are doing their freshman year at home, which I could not imagine. Joining us now is Dr. Jessica Smedley. She's a licensed clinical psychologist that practices in the Washington metropolitan area. She deals with adults and children. We were just talking about children in general. When people walk through your offices, they set up an appointment, they come in to meet with you. How does that process go? Because I have no idea what it is to talk to a psychologist. And I would say that it's never been something, in the news. I've always encouraged it. I've read the PSAs. I've just never myself or anyone in my family's ever been encouraged to, hey, you need to go speak to somebody. It's either your grandmother, your best friend. So what are the questions and what is it like? What's the process?
Sure. Forgive me, my eye is burning, but I'm fine.
No, it's okay.
I just wanted to say it for people who are watching.
It's okay.
That's the thing about virtual world now. It's like you're always on.
Yes.
But so as I said earlier, one of the ways is to start with your primary care physician. It depends on your insurance carrier too.
Okay.
And so it could be looking up your insurance provider website to see who are the behavioral health care providers. And so that could be a master's or doctoral level therapist. So that's one way to start. Another way to start is through looking on the website. So such as Psychology Today, they have a therapist finder, and you can search and narrow down based on insurance, the type of issues that you're looking for help with, costs, location, down to the ethnicity of the provider.
Wow. Okay.
Another popular site now is InnoPsych. And so that is a place that is specifically for people of color to find therapists of color.
Would you say that again, please?
InnoPsych, INNO Psych.
InnoPsych. Okay.
And then, of course, Therapy for Black Girls. That is a very popular one.
Yes, heard about that one.
Yeah. So a lot of these sites exist just to help get access to care. And so once you find a provider, you shoot them an email because everything is virtual now. So you can shoot them an email or call, whatever their bio and website offers, and establish contact. Ask if they offer a free consultation, if you can schedule an appointment, and ask your questions. A lot of times they'll kind of have a feel for what information you'll want to know and be ready to answer questions. But it's not that hard. I think the hardest part is finding the courage to actually start and make the commitment to yourself. But once you open that door, it could be a really meaningful journey.
So is it virtual where instead of sitting on your couch in your office, I'm sitting on my couch in my home?
Yes.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Wow. Do you lose any connection with it? Wow. I really didn't expect you to say that. I did not expect you to say that.
Yeah, we have been completely virtual since middle of March.
What? With new clients?
Yes. Now, there are certain cases where in more severe instances, it is appropriate to be seen in person. So that's when we would still recommend either going to an hospital or a mildly inpatient, outpatient, intensive sort of program, just because it's not appropriate to see someone who might be actively suicidal virtually.
Okay. I was going to ask you. Okay.
And that's just one example. But for the average, functioning person who might still be working, still parenting and dealing with some depression, anxiety, trauma, absolutely. Virtual has been very, exceptional in getting people access.
As a psychologist, we know that when, well, as a human, we know that babies that are preemies, they will tell the parents, come in every day, touch the child. Even though they have the gloves, they go through the machine and they touch the child. So we know that human contact and touch is important. What is this doing from your professional perspective? What is this virus doing to our country the longer and longer it lingers and we're required to be 6 feet, double mask, not going to places? What is it doing to us?
Sure. I think that what you're speaking to is why so many people are having a hard time following the mask mandates or the quarantine mandates, because we are wired for connection
Hmm.
as humans. And
Yeah,
so,
I'm one of them.
yeah.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
you see a lot of people who have now created their pods. So
yes,
it's an identified small group of people who you agree on whatever your boundaries are with the pandemic, and you respect each other, and whatever it is, there's this agreed
yes.
upon safety boundary in place, and people are connecting and trying to stay safe that way. But I think without that, that's where we see some deficits in social development in children, for example, or just feeling the isolation that some adults feel, especially those who live alone. That was certainly a concern that we were seeing early on in the pandemic as well. So people who don't have that inside at home support.
That makes me think, and I've been talking to my daughter for the last couple of months.
Hmm.
The second thing that came to my mind, other than checking on my elderly parents,
Sure.
making sure that they were moving. My father is extremely he's a really, really active person. He's been shut down, and I can see the change in him and his personality. I've never gone to his house at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and he was still in bed. Never. I always
Mm.
call your cell phone. What are you doing? So I see that. But one of the things that I want to kind of transition to is the question about adults.
Sure.
Let's transitioning to just dealing with the things that you're seeing in your office recently in the Washington metropolitan area, which I'm sure could be stamped all across the country.
Right. Yeah. So some of those themes with adults are definitely things like relationship issues. Some of the things you listed, like working with aging parents who might be more vulnerable to the virus and then also have confounding health issues. You have couples who are experiencing various stressors based on whatever their specific dynamics are. You have people who are working from home while also trying to parent, co parent, whatever the situation is, but trying to figure out the best way to maintain their schedules while still taking care of the home and taking care of themselves. And then you see people who are experiencing, as you said earlier, worsening symptoms than what their baseline may have already been because of a history of mental health symptoms that was already there. And then we have grief from people who have either had the virus or know people who have had it or have ultimately not survived the virus. So there are just so many layers of things that adults are dealing with.
When adults come to your facility, what have been the major things or areas of concern? Was it job loss? Was it um, just the virus in and of itself and how it's changed their life, whether they're working or not, or someone that they know and love,
Mhm.
if it's not working because of the virus?
Sure. I think initially it was this adjustment to so many unknowns, to life literally changing in a matter of 24, 48 hours.
Yeah.
And then as the spring progressed, I think it was the social and racial unrest and issues that are in this country. And so lots of people of color feeling overwhelmed with not only the pandemic, but also having to go to work in spaces that aren't feeling safe, or having to talk to their kids about racism and how to stay safe, and just processing the stress and anger from the events that happened, that have been happening, but specifically that happened last spring.
Mhm. I am a self-proclaimed germ freak, and this is way before COVID ever hit. When I tell you, people look at me sometimes. Now I haven't worn the shield yet, so maybe I haven't gone over the board, but nothing wrong with that. I'm not trying to say because my parents wear it,
Absolutely.
my neighbors wear it, but I do the double mask. I wear gloves everywhere and I take them off when I use them.
Hmm.
So I have had dreams, and
Hmm.
as I was talking to my neighbor and I was talking to someone else, we do Zoom or Skype, but we woke up, we had nightmares that we were somewhere um, at outing, and we were in the middle of a place without our mask. Have you had anyone tell you that? And I was freaking out in my dream. I was literally like, how could you do this? What if you inhale it? Like, that's a problem.
I haven't heard anyone say that, but I've certainly experienced
Oh
it
no.
myself.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
what is that? Is that just normal? Okay, process it. Just take your time with it.
it is. And it's how anxiety sometimes shows up. It sometimes is so embedded in our unconscious now. And we've been dealing with it for well beyond 8, 9 months now. And so it's just sort of always at the forefront, I think, of our minds and trying to keep ourselves and our family safe.
You mentioned something earlier before dealing with substance abuse. I would think substance abuse compounded with mental health would be a really dangerous combination if not addressed quickly.
Absolutely, especially when under extreme stress. And so what it
Mhm.
does is it often exacerbates what's already an issue. So whether it's relationship problems or anxiety, depression issues, or being able to function and stay motivated in a productive manner. So it absolutely is just a recipe for not so nice results sometimes.
How long does someone normally have to see you to kind of get back on track? Obviously, I know it varies, but just again, I've never had an opportunity to talk about this,
Mhm.
and knowing that the whole world is also dealing with it. I don't know how long something like this is normally.
Sure. I think it varies. And so there are some people who come in and they say, I want to specifically work on feeling less anxious before I go to bed tonight. And we come up with, a concrete set of maybe coping skills and things to try. And, that could be anywhere from a few months to maybe half a year. And then you have other people who come in because they want to maintain a place for themselves to process life, process dating experiences, process past trauma. And so there are some clients that I've seen for over 2 years.
Oh, okay.
So it can really vary, and it depends on the expectations and the way that the client wants to use that space.
So if you opted a route or didn't have insurance, what does something like that, if someone, is watching the program here
Mhm.
in whatever state they're in, and they're looking for someone, if they're deciding to pay out of pocket for either
Mhm.
privacy or whatever reason, what does something like this range? And
Sure.
is it always an hour visit?
There are some providers who do 30-minute sessions, and there are some who do
Oh,
the full hour. And then there are some
okay.
who do 80 to 90 minutes, especially if it's a family or couple session.
Sure,
Because when
sure,
you add more people to that dynamic, it just that time goes quick.
sure.
But the cost can vary. It depends on location. So I
Okay.
think the average out of pocket fee in the DMV area can be anywhere from maybe 150 to 225 if I had
Okay.
to offer a range. Again,
Sure,
there are
sure.
some
I'm
providers who
not holding you
offer.
to it, but I just think for people,
Oh,
if you've
sure.
never had to even inquire about it, you want to know
Hmm.
these things. And there's a list of things when I told people that I was going to have you on the show that they, shared with me, and wanted, to hear from you what you were
Sure.
saying. Now, before COVID hit, one of my great relaxing things to do that just was my de-stressor,
Hmm.
for some reason, was going to the hairdresser, something as simple as that, and then monthly massages.
Hmm.
So it's obviously altered quite a bit now
Yeah.
in COVID, but is there any advice that you can give to parents on how they can de-stress when you have 4 and 5 people, different ages, all on the computer, all stressed and having deadlines, whether it's homework assignments, projects that they're
Mhm.
doing at work? Is there any advice that you can give to parents so that when they're frustrated, it's not taken out on the child or their mate?
Sure. So I think it's important to keep in mind two things. One is to give each other grace and to lower expectations, because I think that everyone is doing the best that they can. And I also think the second is to always take a time out. I think that we focus on the child taking the time out, but sometimes adults need timeouts too. And so it's okay to ask for that and to role model that, because that's an important way that we regulate our emotions, and we role model that to children as well. And they understand that, okay, it's okay to be angry or frustrated, but it also means that there's a way to do it healthily. And then the other thing is to ask for what you need. So if there is another adult or a spouse or a sibling in the home who can help provide that, then ask for it and come up with new creative boundaries that can be put in place.
We were talking about children. We started off with talking about children. One of
Mm-hmm.
the people a group of people that I wonder and I pray about every single day, um, are children seeking a home, those that are in foster care, those that are homeless. What type of help is being provided for them? I don't know if it's state that you may be aware of.
I am not the best one to answer that in terms of detail right now. Normally, when children are placed in foster care, they typically have a assigned caseworker. They typically are involved in mental health treatment already. So I would like to believe that those things are still in place. I would hope, and whatever other resources that the state agency can offer.
My brother's retired from the Fairfax County division, and I remember when he retired, 10 years or so ago, his caseload were more than he could handle then. I
Hmm.
don't know how you and others are able to do this. So this question is really about you and
Sure.
people like you. How do you unplug? Like, how do you keep your mental health as you
Hmm.
hear all these things? And we're not just talking about COVID related things. You could be dealing with molestation. I mean, all these things. How are you able to process this and maintain your sanity, if I can ask?
Sure. That's where self-care comes in. That's where boundaries comes in. It can be as simple as knowing, okay, I can only see clients this number of days a week because my motto is this is not a 5 day a week job. There
Okay,
are other things that I can do as a psychologist, but that don't
sure.
involve direct care. And so that's where I think you see a lot of us who have several types of roles and jobs just to prevent that burnout. I think that a lot of us do have our own therapists for managing our own stressors and our own personal lives, so that's helpful. And things like exercise and staying engaged with whatever your faith practice is, and engaging with friends and making sure that you do things that are not mental health related to find that balance.
Now, this is a question that came in from Waldorf, Maryland. But what's the potential of separation anxiety with children? They've been 10 months. It's going to be at least 12 to 16 months that they're going to be doing some form, if not total, school virtually with their parents around them. What
Mhm.
about that, and how will that affect them once we get back to normal sometime the end of this year or the first of next year?
Sure. So I think that also depends on the age range.
Oh,
So could that happen with younger children? Sure. But that's where you can still find ways to manage that anxiety, where you role model, okay, this is what's expected now, and this is what we're going to do, and talk them through it, as what the expectation might be as it leads up to that day that schools might be open again. I think that there are children who, like I said earlier, who've been okay with it, but then there are those kids who miss
right.
school and never would have
Right.
thought they missed school.
Right.
And
Exactly. Yes.
so,
Yes.
so I think that there will be a variety of responses, but separation anxiety is valid. I mean, I've seen children recently just for testing, and them coming to their schools again has been an anxious response because they're not ready to engage yet, or they haven't been there in so long, so it's harder to warm up. And then there are other kids who come in and, oh, they take over the classroom. Like it's really easy to engage them and to do some of those testing activities with them.
I have to commend the leaders here in the state of Maryland. I'm only saying this because that's where I live, but I have a teenage daughter, and she went and took a COVID test. And it was really weird. I ran to the store, and when I came back, she said, "Mom, they called me to tell me the results." And I said, "Oh," I said, "Okay, that's great." She goes, "But no, when I said my mom's not here." She said the person on the phone, the nurse said, "I need to see your face because I need to make sure that you're not in distress." And I was like, wow. And so Lauren said she just put it on for like 2 seconds, and she said, "Okay, have your mom give me a call." We go to a dermatology appointment, and they're asking her questions. "Have you ever felt like this?" And I'm like, maybe, I mean, so is that something that you as psychologists have, like that's something they realize is a big issue now, and that they're doing this across the country?
I'm just assuming you
Asking
mean
those
more screening
questions about,
questions.
going beyond. I just have
Mhm,
never heard that before. And even with
mhm.
me, a simple doctor visit, and you
Yeah.
start thinking like, have you ever felt sad? Have you ever wanted to eat? And I'm like, yeah, is that me? So is that something, is that
Yes.
something that is commonplace, or is there something that you did that made them say, let me ask her?
No. No, I think there's a combination of screening questions that physicians, medical care is starting to see
Wow.
as practices move to integrated care, where they are being intentional about being mindful of depression symptoms, anxiety symptoms, um, as well as trauma-informed care, because there are so many people who have experienced trauma, but it hasn't been acknowledged, hasn't been reported. And so I think that it's just another example of the medical field advancing and just being more in tuned into the whole person and not just the pain itself or the symptom itself.
So, Dr. Smedley, um, mental trauma, it's just as bad as physical trauma?
Absolutely. Can be worse because it literally impacts your brain functioning in some capacities. It can disrupt relationships. It can disrupt your sense of safety and how you experience the world and the environment around you. So it absolutely can be devastating.
What are your feelings about medicine to help those dealing with mental or physical anxiety and
Mhm.
depression?
Sure. I am a believer that one should consider all options available for coping. I don't believe that there is one fix for all. I think that we each have um, a specific treatment plan that could involve medication that could help whatever the presenting symptoms may be. I also think it's important to ask questions. So if something doesn't feel right, if you're not clear on something, be your own advocate and ask questions. And as it also relates to medication, I always tell people never underestimate the relationship that you could build with your pharmacist, because a lot of times they can tell you more information about chemical reactions or things that you might already be taking and how it could also interface with something that you were recently prescribed. So just gaining information and asking questions.
I received a text, and I can't see her name right now, but there was a question. She was a little concerned about reaching out for professional help and
Mhm.
her employer finding out about it.
Mm, sure. So that can vary. That certainly is an issue with people who have security clearances, especially in this area for government
Yes, yes.
employees. Sometimes for medical, it depends on the field,
Okay.
but some people choose not to use their insurance for that reason
Yes.
because they want to just pay out of pocket, keep that part of their lives separate. Um, and there are privacy things in place to where,
Sure.
we can't report very few things that we can report in that relationship. And that has to be safety related, where we would break that confidence.
Sure.
But
Dr. Smith, oh no, say that again.
that is something that you could ask your potential provider about once you set up a consultation.
Okay. Dr. Smedley, will you tell us where your practice is, as far as what city you work in, and how someone can reach out to you if they want to get a consultation, whether it's free or not? What do they have to do to reach out to you, or if you have a system of licensed clinical psychologists with your group?
Sure. So I am practicing in DC,
Okay.
also licensed in Virginia. The group practice that I work with, we take referrals from the immediate DMV area. The easiest way to connect to me is probably through my website, which is smedleypsych.com. or my email address, which will give you a link for a therapy, information form, or other details are there when you send that email, and it's info@smedleypsych.com.
Now, I want to ask you, there's two things. So I got a text from Michelle and she said, do you do hypnosis? Is that something that you practice?
That is
Or
not
is it
something that is in
psychology?
my yeah, I know therapists who do, but it's not in my
Okay.
background.
Really? Okay.
Hmm.
I see the shows all the time. Thank you, Lisa, by the way, for sending that question. I see shows all the time. They're like one, two, and I'm like, really? I know that they're being not silly for that, but I just really wonder. So, have you heard positive things about hypnosis? And I'm sure there's some people who just can't be hypnotized, right?
I don't feel that I have the background to answer in
To
detail
answer that
or to
question.
have the
Okay, so
experience
Lisa
directly,
knows
but
all your answers, but she
yeah.
definitely, Dr. Smedley, does not deal with that. So, Dr. Smedley, what are some of the type of questions that you ask adults when either they're doing a consultation with you or they're talking to you over the phone?
Sure. So I typically ask them what brings them in. What are they hoping to get out of therapy? If they've had therapy experiences before, what worked and what didn't work? Because I think it's important to think about what we don't want to replicate, since it's such a deeply intimate process.
Yeah.
And so being mindful of making a space that's intentional for you. And then I also think it's important to ask people, what their expectations and goals are at the end of the sessions.
I think that's great. Is there any correlation? I talk to my daughter about this all the time, about sunlight, fresh air, being exposed to it that can bring up your attitude and your feeling about life.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think that especially in areas like the East Coast, or where there are seasons where the days are shorter and the weather is colder, and so we see higher numbers of seasonal affective disorder.
Mm-hmm.
But that getting sun and going for walks and doing things outdoors safely as we can is really important to maintaining a positive mood and keeping those serotonin and dopamine levels at a good place so that we are functioning at our best capacity.
Is there any vitamins that you would recommend for people in general that's usually a good booster, a vitamin C or a vitamin D, other than obviously going outside and getting some sunshine if we get days like that? We're still in winter.
Sure. So because I'm not a prescriber, that's out of
Oh,
my scope, but
okay.
I absolutely encourage people to talk to their primary care about what's appropriate for them.
That is really important. So, as we wrap up and round up our interview with you, Dr. Jessica Smedley, she's a licensed clinical psychologist. She works in the metropolitan area. So, for those of you that are not in this area, the DMV, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, what are some closing words that you would like to give to anyone that's listening to us now that either may be depressed or stressed or dealing with anxiety, or they may know someone who is?
Absolutely. So again, I think it's important that we give each other grace, including starting in the mirror. I think a lot of times we have a certain expectation of ourselves and we don't offer enough flexibility and grace in not maybe doing the same intense workouts that we once did, or cooking as much as we did, or we may have gained those 5 to 10 pounds. So just being flexible, being kind to yourself, adjusting expectations. So again, we are going through a collective global crisis. And so what we do now and how we spend our time now is going to be very different from what it once was. And so letting those expectations be flexible. And then to just be creative. So if there are things that you miss that you once, were able to do safely in the world or with other people, what are other ways that you can connect with people? I know people are tired of technology, but there are growing apps out there that allow you to watch movies together on an app, or play games together. People are having virtual themed parties and are surprisingly enjoying themselves. And so just continuing to stay encouraged and to stay connected to people.
Dr. Smedley, as we close out, and again, so thankful to have you here. I'm sure I would love to have you before the year's out, because I'm sure there's going to be an ebb and flow with people feeling like they're good and now they're not, and they're good. And even the emotions of being happy and sad can be draining. What are
Absolutely.
three challenges that you can give everybody, whether you think you're dealing with stress or not? Three challenges, specific challenges that you can give us today to do by the end of the week to just kind of um, awaken our senses, whether we're dealing with this issue or not.
Okay. One challenge I would say is to do something physical.
Okay.
So a walk, a yoga class, a dance class, whatever it is, something to get your body moving. Check in and see how you're feeling. Are you still as flexible as you thought you once were, or are you getting winded faster? Another one could be coming up with your self-care list for yourself. So if you were to look at your physical wellness, mental wellness, financial, spiritual wellness, whatever it is, what are 2 or 3 things that you can do for yourself to reinvest in those areas? And for a third thing, I would say do something creative, do something outside the box. Stretch your brain a little bit, because I think what keeps our brains functioning and motivated is doing something new and tricking the brain every now and then. And that means breaking up the monotony and the routine.
I love those advices. So now I feel good when I watch all those. There's a show that comes on. It's Brain Teasers, and it's just so interesting how the mind can be shown or made to think or believe something by just changing the dimensions of a picture or
Mm-hmm.
color. And so I just think it's interesting that it does something that stimulates the mind. Dr.
Absolutely.
Jessica Smedley, licensed clinical psychologist servicing the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. I just really have to thank you for your time and your insight. I can tell you that I know that your information, for those that are struggling with what to do and where to go, you've given them some information to start the process. I just really have to thank you for joining us. And I really would like to have you come back in a couple of months as people may be getting back down into that low zone, on that valley of getting some new information revived about what they can do to really get themselves back in a positive place until we get through this virus.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and I'd be happy to be back.
Oh, I cannot wait. Well, let me tell you, next week, can you believe it? It's going to be Valentine's weekend. So next week, I have two unbelievable, an international and a national celebrity joining us for a very, very special Valentine's Day interview. So don't miss it. 7 p.m. next week, right here on NNPA. Again, Dr. Smedley, thank you so very much. And until next week's, everyone, God bless and goodbye.